I would like to welcome you to the second Hoover Education Summit, and thank you all very much for coming. Not only do we have an exciting program for you over the next day and a half, but we are delighted that the weather has decided to cooperate, at least here. Everywhere else seems to be chaos. So feel free to stay as long as you must and continue the visit in California. I'm just going to talk a couple of logistical details to share with you. There's a slight change in the lineup tomorrow in the sense that we are going to be having our lunch speaker speak in Hauk before lunch. We thought that that would be a nicer thing than trying to have him speak over people eating. So the implication of that is that you should carb up at breakfast because lunch is going to be late. The other thing that I want to mention is that you may notice a slightly different way that we have set the tables tonight. We started a tradition at the first summit, which was instead of flowers, we had stacks of books. And we're continuing that this time. As I was thinking about what kinds of books, I thought, wouldn't it be great to find a way to invite you to open your minds and have a different perspective to come to our meeting tomorrow with. And so, having been a lifelong fan of these large format books, also known as coffee table books, I've spent the last year collecting them specifically to make them available to you. And so what I'm hoping you'll do is to take one of the coffee table books home with you and spend a few moments enjoying the perspective that it provides to you. I think of it as a brain spa for 5 or 10 minutes. And these books are yours to keep. But if you prefer to foster and not adopt, then I would invite you to return the book to us tomorrow. Please do not leave them in the hotel rooms because they will end up in the landfill. And if you return the books tomorrow, we will have a trolley outside to collect them, and we will find good homes for them. It will also give you the opportunity to shop the trolley in case you want a different book or books. So we would love to have you enjoy them, take them home, bring them back, whatever suits you. I would also like to say that the privilege of introducing our dinner speaker falls to Eric Hesek, who is going to take the stage now and introduce her.
I'd like to provide my own welcome to everybody who's made it here, avoiding fires and snow and everything to get here. I'm Eric Hesek, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, and I have the distinct privilege of being able to introduce my boss, Condoleezza Rice. I think that everybody in this room knows a lot about our 66th Secretary of State. What fewer people in this room know is that she is really the poster child for this whole conference and what we're going to talk about for the next few days. She was born in Montgomery, Alabama, and that was the center of the segregated South at one point. And while the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled on Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, and outlawed segregated schools, the South resisted this opening up of schools to everybody. So when Condi had a chance to go to schools, she was not faced with the most the best kinds of schooling opportunities. But while Condi had two parents that really valued education, she was not afforded the same opportunity to get a good public education that leads me to be on this stage today and leads many of you to be in this audience. She had much poorer choices. But what she did have, and what made her very lucky, is that she had two parents who believed in education and had the ability to homeschool her school her for part. They could send her to a Catholic secondary school and support her education throughout. So when she then went on to college and obtained her BA and finally PhD in political science and international relations, she had the basic skills that she needed for her remarkable academic and governmental career. So with those degrees and that education, she could become a professor at Stanford University. She could become the provost of Stanford University. She could go to work first in the State Department of President Jimmy Carter, who we honored today, but then become the National Security Advisor to George W. Bush and then Secretary of State for George W. Bush. Of course, all of these intermediate steps allowed her to get to her highest job, which is being director of the Hoover Institution. This history has led Condi to have a passion for ensuring that all children have a high quality education. And she has emphasized education throughout her career, including in her international relations work, where she and Joel Klein wrote a book on the importance of high quality education for US national security. She is here today to open the Hoover Education Summit that is designed to find ways to ensure that all children have a high quality education. So I give you Condi Rice.
Well, thanks, Rick, for that wonderful introduction. And I just want to say that I'm very proud as the director of the Hoover Institution of the work that we do here in K-12 education. You are seeing some of the fruits of that with the Education Futures Council and the work that you'll share in and participate in tomorrow. But it's really a daily obsession, I would say, of people like Rick Hesek and Macke Raymond and others to try to bring the best research and the best ideas to improving education for our children. And so I'm delighted to have a chance to open this conference tonight. I want to thank you for giving your time. I want to thank you, as Rick said, for making it here. We know that there are a lot of conditions all over the country that make that not so easy, but we'll remind you that you're actually in California, Northern California. It's beautiful. It's January, so welcome anytime, particularly when the weather is cold. You're always welcome here. When this was first mentioned to me that we might do this Education Futures Council, I have to tell you that I said to Macke and Rick and Steve Bowen, why are we doing this again? Because it seems that the country reaches a point, a kind of pitch of the intention to do something about K-12 education when there's Sputnik. We reach a fever pitch every time NAEP comes out. We reach a fever pitch whenever there's another OECD study that shows that the United States is, and our children are behind in math or in reading or whatever. It reaches a fever pitch after COVID, when we learn of the significant learning loss that our children have experienced. And so why again? Why go at it again? Well, because we don't have a choice. I was with Joel Klein, a leader of a task force for the Council on Foreign Relations that brought the national security perspective in, not because we wanted to make education a national security issue, but because we wanted to say that if you think that the education of other people's children or the ill education of other people's children is not your problem, think again. Because the education, the ill education of other people's children will impact your life and the life of the country. And so we wanted to bring a different audience into the discussion of education and education reform. And that audience has to be all of America. It has to be a country that finally says this is a national disgrace, that so many of our children, particularly the poorest of our children, are left in a system in which many of them cannot read by third grade. And we know if they can't read by third grade, they're probably not going to read. And so we hope that this effort will bring sometimes radical ideas. Maybe not all of them are good, but we wanted to challenge a group of people who are willing to spend a year together to think hard about how we address the operating system, as Macke called it, of public education. So that maybe this time there's some kind of breakthrough, some levers that we can use to make change. We've tried to make change in all kinds of ways, and I don't by any means want to denigrate the efforts of those who have had ideas, many best practices that are being carried out across the country, legislators and school chiefs and parents and and state governors who are trying. But with all of those efforts, we still see that many people believe the best option for their children, and this includes parents, is not to be in a public school. I can tell you a story about that. I started with a friend out in East Palo Alto, a program called Center for a New Generation. And it was a program of after school and summer programs for underserved kids. We were going after what we called strivers. So you only had to have a C average and a teacher's recommendation. And I would meet every year with, by the time they were ninth grade, the kids who were getting ready to go off to high school, and they'd choose 4 or 5 of the most successful, and they would bring them to lunch with me. And I would say, where are you going to high school? Because Ravenswood doesn't have a high school. And to a person, they would try to name a private school. And you would say to this 14-year-old, well, why are you going to private school? Because everybody knows they're better, they would say. That's an indictment of a country that has always believed that public education was a part of the birthright of democracy. And so, as much as I am a believer in school choice and an advocate for school choice, we have to do something about where the majority of kids will be educated, and that's in the public schools. The Education Futures Council talked about student-centered learning. And for some of us who aren't in the education business, we said, isn't that what this is all about? And I learned that actually it's not what it's always about. And so going to the core of what we're trying to do is so critical. We wanted to talk about more innovative and adaptive systems. Someone said in an earlier meeting that essentially this system was designed 100 years ago and essentially it hasn't changed. Can you think of any other part of American life about which you can say that? Responsive to local conditions, because what it takes in Laverne, Alabama might be different than what it takes in Los Angeles, California. And so we wanted to think about a new bargain with teachers, to emphasize their importance to society. But the bargain is that as a profession, you take seriously the desire to get better, to perform better, to have merit recognized, not just time in the classroom. This piece of it was particularly important to me because my mom was a teacher. My dad was actually a high school guidance counselor, later on a university administrator. And Rick rightly said that the schools in Alabama for Black kids were not that great, but boy, the teachers were fantastic. In some ways, it was a commentary on the society at the time that if you were a Black woman, you probably were going to be a teacher or a nurse. Those were your options. And so the best and the brightest went into teaching. And it was true also for Black males. I will tell you that one of the most celebrated moments in the life of any family in Alabama was the new teachers convention at the beginning of September. Now, I remember this because my mother's brother had gotten a teaching degree after having served in the armed forces. And I remembered the pride in my family that Alto was going to be a teacher. What happened to that in this society? What happened to that kind of affirmation for communities? What happened to that kind of affirmation that in my father's church, the new teachers had to stand up and be recognized because they were going to do the most important work? And so it has to be a bargain, but it has to be a bargain both ways. We have to recognize the urgency with brutal honesty. I think we have to have a national conversation about the importance of education and this time delivering. Now, there are 4 personal reasons that this is important to me. The first is you had to know the Rices and the Rays. It was faith, family, and education. And education was something that could never be taken away from you. In fact, my grandfather on my father's side was a sharecropper son in Utah. That would be E-U-T-A-W. I'm not kidding, Alabama. And when he was a young man, he decided he wanted to get book learning in a college. And so they told him about this. He asked how a colored man could go to college. They told him about this little Presbyterian school down the road called Stillman College. And so he saved up his cotton. He went to Stillman College. He got through his first year. Then they said, how are you going to pay for your second year? He said, I'm out of cotton. They said, you're out of luck. But he was a pretty quick thinker. He said, so how are those boys going to college? They said, they have what's called a scholarship. And if you wanted to be a Presbyterian minister, then you could have a scholarship too. And my grandfather said, that is exactly what I had in mind. And my family has been Presbyterian and college educated ever since. But, you know, we often talk about education in very instrumental ways. And I do believe that today we have many ways for people to have a decent living and have a good job and have the fulfillment of that. You know, when the founding fathers talked about the pursuit of happiness, I really think you could call it the pursuit of fulfillment. And having a good job and that's really important. But whether you go to college or not, education does something else for you. It lifts you up. It shows you horizons that you might otherwise not see. And that's what John W. Rice Sr. understood. And he understood it was going to change the Rice legacy forever. In fact, it changed it so much that, of course, my father was advanced degree, my mother's family, all advanced degrees, and my Aunt Teresa. My Aunt Teresa went to the University of Wisconsin in 1952. She got a PhD in Victorian literature. She wrote books on Dickens. You think what I do is weird for a Black person? She wrote books on Dickens. So education is, yes, a hand up and a way up, but it's also a lifting up of the human spirit. So as a descendant of the Rices and Rays, this matters to me. It matters to me as an educator. When I stand in front of my class at Stanford, I want to be sure that that 4th generation legatee is sitting next to the child of an itinerant farm worker. And if that's not true, then we're missing something very important about the democratic tradition and the democratic enterprise. As a national security expert, I am concerned about our competitiveness as a country. I'm concerned that only 33% of the people who take the basic skills test to get into the military can pass it. It is a matter of lost learning. It's a matter of drug addiction. It's a matter of poor health. But if you can fix that education piece, I'll bet you'll fix a lot of the other elements as well. And as a citizen, I'm always reminded that we in America have a rather odd compact as citizens. You know, if the proverbial man from Mars were to come down and say, what unites these Americans? They don't look the same. And you would have to say, yes, that's right, because you see, their ancestors have come up from all over the world, and they're actually not united by ethnicity or nationality or religion. And you would say, what in the world does unite them then? And you'd say, well, you see, they're united by this creed. Doesn't matter where you came from, it matters where you're going. You can come from humble circumstances and you can do great things. And that's what unites them. Without a high quality education, when I can look at your zip code and tell whether that's going to be true for you, I can't make that promise, can I? That it doesn't matter where you came from, it matters where you're going. And so this is the very fabric of who we are as a people. It's the very fabric of who we are as a society. And if we don't deliver on it, we deserve what we get. And right now, we're starting to see the effects of having not delivered over many, many decades. So we hope that this report, we hope that this council, we hope that the discussion that you will have over the next day or so will push us yet again to try to think anew and to be inspired, to let no barriers stay in the way of making sure that every child has that chance. Thank you very much.
We are going to open this up to questions and questions and answers, hopefully, that from the audience. But before we get into questions, as you have to get a microphone from one of our colleagues, part of the question is what we should be producing. What does good education look like? And is there a simple answer to that, or how does that fit into this discussion?
Well, the wraparound answer to that is that we will produce kids who are confident in their ability to do a few things, and in which we can have confidence that they can do a few things. And I actually do think it's, you know, we talk about, well, I was on a call today. We want them to have self-esteem. We want them to be ready and prepared for a life of enjoyment and a life of fulfillment. All of that's true. But if they can't read, none of that is going to be true. So let's start with they should have certain skills. They should be able to read. They should be able to do simple mathematics without a calculator. They should be able to have some ability to understand the world around them, including the technologies that, frankly, they almost seem to have been born, come out of the womb, able to work those little devices. But do they understand that? Do they understand at some point in their lives citizenship? Do they understand the importance in a little later in their lives of being able to listen to people who think differently? Do they understand how to make a point without being, so it's a progression. But I think it starts with, can you read? Can you access information? And then do you begin to have the judgment to know whether you're accessing information that is true?
And so a second question that comes back to the Education Futures Council's report, it calls for fairly radical changes in the way we look at the system. Many of them seem very sensible and commonsensical, but they're radical given where we are. How do we get there? Do we ask the Secretary of Education in Washington, D.C. to dictate this?
Probably not. Look, I do think that one of the things that I've thought a lot about as the leader of several institutions, but also somebody who's had to manage issues and had to manage change, is the most important thing you can do is get the right level of responsibility and the right level of authority matched up. And there are so many levels, particularly in K-12 education, that I'm not sure we always think about who should be doing what. So there are things that the federal government should be doing, but let's be pretty clear on what those are. And it's probably that they don't have enough visibility into what's going on in a particular state or what's going on in a particular community to actually say useful things. So what can they say useful things about? And then align authority and responsibility so that the federal government is not dictating things that it doesn't understand. Then when you get to the state level, what is it that the state house is going to do, that the legislature is going to do? What still needs to be reserved for the school boards or for the state chiefs? What will be the role of parents in that? Because obviously the parent is with that child more than the teacher. And so I like to think of it in that way. When we understand that there's something that makes sense, what's the right level of authority and responsibility to make sure that it gets done?
So is this what you call flipping the system then?
It's clearly flipping the system. I mean, I have to say, and one of the great things about sitting through the Education Futures Council meetings is I no longer say, well, what do you mean? Doesn't everybody do that? Because I mentioned it, you know, when they said to me, well, the school should be student-centered. I thought, well, that's a penetrating glimpse into the obvious. But of course, apparently not. And so bringing these things up in a way that we can be pretty brutally honest about what's not getting done. What does it mean that the schools are not student-centered? I heard it put in another way, which is too much of what we do in the schools is to make the life of the adults easier or more fulfilling or whatever. And so what does it really mean to be student-centered, and then try to go for it?
So thank you, Condi. If people have any questions, we have a couple microphones on the side. If you would just give your name and then your question, and a question would be preferred over a statement.
Good evening, Dr. Rice. My name is Yolanda Beckles, and I'm the Executive Director of the Knowledge Shop. I drove at 4 o'clock this morning from Fires in LA to get here to your Education Summit.
Oh, thank
and
you.
It's proving worth it. Thank you. My question is, in the Knowledge Shop, we train particularly Black and brown children. And I started it 10 years ago because, as you can hear, I'm British. And I came here with 2 children who were math literate. And when we got here, we said, America, what is this? And today my daughter is an astrophysicist, scientist, mathematician, and aerospace engineer for Rolls-Royce. I say that because in the work that you're doing, please focus on parents and families. That's where in my work for 10 years, I have found the change to really move the needle.
Yeah.
When you can develop, train, and empower your parents to understand the kind of children that we're raising in a 21st century, that's what's going to move the agenda in America. It really is down to our families today. So as you think about your student-centered role, parents have to be at every table, including in this room, may I suggest.
Thank you. And I think you'll find that we've done that. I agree with you completely. I often say that the problem with my parents was that I had to try to stop them from going up to the school after every matter. And I would say sometimes as I got older, I can handle that. I can handle that. But yes, parents are absolutely key.
Madam Secretary, my honor. 2 questions, 1 professional, 1 personal. In my work with former Secretary, the late Bill Brock, he discovered with some patented technology from the Meekers, who are USC related, that if you looked at how close a child watched television between year 1 and year 3, one of those cognitive and perceptual tests would reveal that there was a complication with their left-right eye coordination, and no reading curriculum would fix that you had to therapeutically address that. And so much has been delved into trying to get folks to read without looking at the cognition and the perceptual issues. He said he could reduce the wrongfully referred special ed population by 1/3 to 1/2. I wonder if that factors into potential learning reform. The personal question, because I don't know when I'll ever have a chance to ask this, is what is your favorite hymn? And is there anyone you would have preferred to do a duet on the piano with?
Thank you. Well, in terms of the point about cognition, look, we have a lot of science now. This is not my field, but I will tell you something. We have a lot of science now that is based very much on being able to understand how the brain actually works, right? And when I became provost of Stanford in 1993, psychology and a lot of areas were still kind of social psychology. By the time I left in 1999, it was imaging that was dominant. And so we obviously need to tap into what is being learned and understood in the neurosciences. You mentioned that I'm a pianist. I once did an experiment for them. They wanted to see, apparently the most complicated thing that a human being can do is to sight read music, piano, because you have to read two different clefs this way and that way at the same time. And they wanted to see how did the eye move when do you catch something in your peripheral vision? Are you catching that first or that first? And so they put electrodes on you and they kind of watch what your eyes do. So there are lots of ways now that I think we could tap into the science to understand how children learn. But then we have to actually put it into practice. I remember when computers came into the schools and you would go and there were and everybody was donating computers and they were stacking up in the corner because nobody really knew how to use them. So if we're going to employ technology, I think we're going to have to do it using the old-fashioned method of let's make sure that the people who are going to have to do it really understand it and can use it. But I think there's a lot of promise in the neurosciences. And my favorite hymn is I Need Thee Every Hour.
Dr. Rice, thank you very much. I'm Tyler Kramer, and I'm not here in an official capacity, but I am a member of the National Assessment Governing Board for the National Assessment of Educational Progress. My question, though, goes to your background as a political scientist. How are you going, or how would political scientists look at this in terms of changing the political behavior that supports the existing system versus what it takes to reflip it? And number two, where have we been successful in flipping the system in the past? And thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, we've actually flipped a lot of systems, including, for instance, back when Bill Clinton did welfare reform. That was a very successful. Now you ask yourself, how did he do it, right? Because there were a lot of interest arrayed around a certain kind of system. On the other hand, we've not been able to do it around entitlements like Social Security. So I would, as a political scientist, always ask myself 3 questions. The first is, what in the incentive structure of the people who have to flip the system is preventing them to do so? So that's the first question. The second question is, who are the biggest culprits in having perverse incentives for those people? And the third is, how do you break through those incentives and who do you need to do that, right? So if I think about the incentives and what the incentives are for politicians, it's getting reelected. That takes a certain amount of support and money. And so if I go to the second, I say, where is some of this money coming from and the people who are most resistant to reform? And I say, is there a way to either change the incentives of the teachers' unions or to sideline the teachers' unions, right? So I actually worked with Randy Weingart at one point in this task force that I did with Joel Klein. Maybe there's some way to get teachers' unions to see that the incentives that they are producing for politicians who are dependent on them for funding and support are not good incentives. I thought that after COVID, there was a moment to do that, because the degree to which people didn't want kids to go back to school. I mean, who are we kidding? If Safeway baggers are essential personnel, why are teachers not essential personnel? I just didn't get it. And then there's the third, where does the pressure come from on politicians and those who need to change the incentives? And every effective revolutionary movement has also had a mass element to it. And I think parents, having watched what they watched during COVID, are an element of that. I think business leaders are an element of that because they see that they're not getting the workers that they need. I think the national security community is a part of that because we can't keep going on with only 33% of the people able to pass the basic skills test. And so I've thought that part of the problem for the education community is too insular. It has to mobilize other parts of the society, parts of the polity that say we can't keep going this way. And so one of the things that I hope we can do, I don't know if he's even here, but one of the members of the yes over there, one of the members of our council is Andrew Luck, right? And I'm hoping that, Andrew, who coached in high school and as I remember, wants to do something for better coaching and so forth, that's a community that ought to be mobilized. So think of the mass piece of it while you're thinking about the incentives of politicians. I said to friends of mine at one point, where's your 1 million person march for K-12 education reform? Gets people's attention.
We have time for one more question.
You've got it.
Madam Secretary, thank you so much for actually setting a vision that unfortunately right now seems rare around improving public education. I guess I wanted to build a little bit on the last question. My name is Van Scholes. I'm from the Keystone Policy Center. What do you think, what are some of the lessons learned? I mean, it was fun to walk across campus today. I started this journey 37 years ago, and I've seen a lot of visions. I've seen a lot of movements, some of them successful, many of them not. What can we in the ed space learn? And I think it's sometimes helpful to have somebody on the outside looking in.
Yes, I would encourage clarity. If you tell me, as my ed council colleagues who are educators told me, that saying that this should be student-centered or child-centered is a revelation, I would say that message needs to be out there, right? That's a very clear message that we've lost the focus on the child and all other kinds of things are getting in the way. I don't think I follow education reform. I don't think I knew that. Clarity. What is it, Rick asked at the beginning, what is it that they need to know? What are we talking about? What about, how can we make any progress if we don't assess? How can we do that? There's no other activity in the world that you can know what you're doing if you don't assess what you're doing. And so I think some very clear messages about why education reform is not taking hold in the way that it should. And that, again, not to denigrate that a lot of people have tried, not to denigrate that some people have succeeded. That's not the point. But we haven't succeeded on a broad enough scale to make a difference to the country. And in that regard, people want to muddy the water all the time, right? We know that life is tough in certain schools, that the problems that the child brings to the classroom are really, really tough. We know that the family structure is breaking down or has broken down in the United States. We know all of those things. But are we going to say those are challenges that we have to overcome? Are we going to say they're excuses for not educating kids? And so I think some clarity from the education community about some of these things that you may believe we all take for granted when we don't all take them for granted. That's how I would speak to the outside community. Thank you. Thanks very much.